The afternoon sun bathed the narrow street in a golden haze as I walked home from school, dragging my backpack along like a weight I couldn't shake. It had been a long day, and a dull headache pulsed behind my eyes. Normally, I stayed late, for extracurriculars, but something inside me, maybe exhaustion, maybe instinct, urged me to head straight home. Our house stood at the corner of the lane, modest but well kept. My mother took pride in that. She worked tirelessly at a textile factory across town, often gone from sunrise until after dark. Since marrying my stepfather, Saleem, she'd found what she called stability, though to me it always felt more like quiet resignation. Saleem was a man of few words and many rules. He dressed sharply, spoke softly in public, and smiled only when necessary. People in the neighborhood admired his discipline. Inside our home, though, the air thickened when he entered a room. He wasn't cruel, at least not in the way stories describe. But there was a coldness in him, a way he looked at me like I was some unwelcome burden. My mother never noticed, or perhaps she chose not to. The only person who broke that silence was our neighbor, Shazia Aunty. In her mid-30s, she had a laugh that spilled into the alleyway and bangles that jingled with every gesture. She often brought over food or borrowed spices, filling the house with her cheerful chatter. My mother liked her, and so did I, though her visits became more frequent when my mom wasn't home. That day, as I turned the doorknob, I noticed something strange, an eerie quiet, the kind that doesn't belong in a lived-in home. I pushed the door open gently. The television wasn't on, and the hallway light flickered dimly. I could hear faint murmurs coming from the back room, voices, a man's voice, a woman's giggle. My heart picked up speed, more curious than alarmed. Maybe Mom had taken the day off. I stepped quietly down the corridor, my shoes making soft thuds against the wooden floor. The voices grew clearer. Laughter followed by silence. Then, a sound I couldn't quite place. I stopped at the edge of the doorway, unsure whether to call out. My hand rested on the frame and I leaned in just enough to see. My breath caught. It was Saleem and Shazia Aunty. Together. Too close. Too intimate. Their positioning, their expressions. It wasn't something a child should see. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were witnessing. Then, as if sensing my presence, Saleem looked up. His eyes met mine. A flash of panic swept across his face, followed by something darker. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall behind me. In an instant, he rose to his feet. "Tum yahan kya kar rahi ho?" he growled. Before I could answer, he stormed toward me. In that moment, I didn't know what frightened me more, what I had seen or what he would do next. Before I could react, Saleem's hand closed around my wrist like a vice. His face, once blank and emotionless, now burned with fury. I winced as his grip tightened and he yanked me away from the doorway, slamming the door behind him so hard that the glass pane rattled. I could hear Shazia Aunty fumbling with her clothes inside, hurried whispers barely audible through the door. "What exactly did you see?" he hissed, his breath hot with rage. I couldn't speak. My heart pounded against my ribcage like it wanted to escape. Every instinct told me to run, but my feet were frozen in place. He shook me once hard, and my silence seemed to enrage him further. "Answer me," he barked. I didn't mean to," I stammered, but before I could finish, his hand struck the side of my face. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. My vision blurred for a moment. The sting was immediate, but it was the betrayal, not the pain, that made my legs go weak. He had always been distant, cold, but this was different. This was violence. Behind him, Shazia Aunty slipped out of the room, her dupatta crooked, eyes wide with fear. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. She simply scurried past like a guilty shadow, out the front door and into the fading afternoon light. Saleem turned back to me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "You saw nothing," he growled. "Do you understand me?" I nodded slowly, more out of fear than agreement. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them down. Crying would only give him more power. Still, I couldn't stop the question that escaped my lips. Why her? His expression shifted, just for a second. Not guilt, not regret, just disdain. You're a child. You wouldn't understand, he spat. Don't test me again. If your mother hears even one word of this, I'll make sure you regret it. He pushed past me and disappeared into his room, locking the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, trembling. The house, once silent then explosive, was now filled with a different kind of noise. The sound of my heart breaking. The sound of trust dissolving. I went to my room, locking the door quietly, scared he might return. My reflection in the mirror showed a red mark across my cheek, already beginning to swell. I touched it lightly, not because it hurt, but because it was real. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. Proof that everything had changed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the ticking clock and the occasional creak of footsteps outside my door. I wished for my mother to come home early, to notice something, to ask me what was wrong. But she didn't. And I couldn't tell her. Not yet. The next morning, I wore my school scarf a little higher, hiding the faint bruise that bloomed like a secret across my cheek. My mother, exhausted as always, barely noticed. She kissed my forehead in passing, murmuring something about an early shift and a pot of dal on the stove. I nodded, pretending everything was fine. Inside, I was a storm. At school, I drifted through classes, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Saleem's furious face, Shazia Auntie's shameful silence, the slap that still burned beneath my scarf. My chest felt heavy with the weight of truth I wasn't allowed to tell. Are you okay? A voice asked beside me during lunch break. It was Faris, the boy who always sat in the second row. He wasn't loud or overly confident like the others. He read a lot, kept mostly to himself, and somehow always managed to be kind without trying too hard. We'd spoken a few times in class, casual, friendly, but today, something in his voice felt different, gentle, concerned. I opened my mouth to lie, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I looked away, blinking hard. He didn't push. He just sat there, offering half his sandwich and a quiet presence that felt oddly comforting. Over. The next few days, he continued to check in. Sometimes it was just a smile in the hallway. Other times, a quiet walk to the school gate. Slowly, I found myself drawn to him, not because he asked questions, but because he didn't. He made me feel seen without demanding anything in return. One afternoon, while we worked on a group assignment in the library, he finally said, I know something's wrong. You don't have to tell me now. But if you ever do, I'll listen. His words clung to me longer than they should have. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about telling him everything. The betrayal, the threats, the fear that had taken root in my own home. But even imagining it made me feel disloyal, as if speaking the truth would somehow tear my family apart. And yet, I couldn't deny the comfort his presence gave me. It was innocent, unspoken, but real. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. Something almost like hope. But Saleem's shadow still loomed large. He had become careful, smiling more in front of my mother, pretending to be the concerned husband. But his eyes never softened when they met mine. They were full of warnings. And I understood every one of them. Still, Faris's kindness had planted a seed of courage in me. A small voice inside me whispered that I didn't have to carry this alone forever. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way out. But I knew the risk. If I spoke, everything would change. And if I stayed silent, I might never find my voice again. It was a rainy Thursday when everything came to a head. The sky had turned a dull gray, and the steady rhythm of rain on the rooftop echoed my growing anxiety. My mother was working late again, and I found myself alone with Saleem in the house, a scenario I had begun to dread more than I ever thought possible. He moved through the house with calculated ease, pretending nothing had changed. But his eyes always watched me closely, threateningly. I knew the slap wouldn't be the last if I slipped, even once. That night, as I was drying dishes in the kitchen, he appeared behind me without a sound. I froze. His presence alone sent a shiver up my spine. "You've been quiet," he said, voice smooth like oil but laced with menace. "Good. Let's keep it that way." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my hands trembling, ever so slightly over the plates. But then he stepped closer, too close, and something inside me cracked. I couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for him to strike, waiting to see what boundary he would cross next. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, not because I believed it, but because I needed him to hear it. His eyes narrowed. "You should be." I turned to face him, heart pounding wildly in my chest. Maybe I was, but not anymore. He stared at me, stunned, as though he couldn't comprehend that I had finally pushed back. For a tense second, the air was so heavy I could barely breathe. Then, without warning, he stepped away. No words, no threats, just a cold smile. That scared me more than any slap ever could. Later that night, I sent a message to Faris. I didn't explain everything, but I said enough. I told him I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge. He replied instantly. "You're not alone. Tell me everything. We'll figure it out." The next day, I skipped school and went straight to the counselor's office instead. Faris had given me the confidence to speak, not just about what I saw, but what I'd endured since. It was terrifying, but once the words left my mouth, I felt lighter, like I had finally loosened the chains I'd been carrying for weeks. What followed moved quickly. Authorities got involved. My mother was devastated. At first, she didn't want to believe it, but when they confronted Saleem with my statement and other neighbors' quiet suspicions, his false charm crumbled. He was arrested. The house, once filled with tension, slowly became quiet again, but this time, peacefully so. My mother and I began rebuilding our trust, piece by piece. As for Faris, he never once treated me differently. He listened, he cared, and in his quiet way, he reminded me what real respect felt like. This wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. It was about survival, about finding light in the darkest of places, and finally, after everything, about learning to trust again,